Hello. Welcome to our True Colors United True Colors Day live stream. I am your host, Twiggy, Pucci, Garçon. I use she, her, they, and them pronouns, and I'm the Chief Program Officer here at True Colors United. For those of you who don't know, True Colors United works in LGBTQ youth homelessness, and True Colors Day is our International Day of Advocacy around preventing and ending LGBTIQ youth homelessness. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and questioning young people are 120% more likely to experience homelessness than non-LGBTIQ youth. We believe that everyone deserves a safe place to call home, regardless of their class, of their race, of their ethnicity, of their gender, or of their sexual orientation. It's also a day to celebrate people who are working to ensure LGBTIQ people have housing no matter what the challenge is. Across the world, we know that young people and adult partners are making significant progress to end youth homelessness, and communities are mobilizing to create change, and youth are leading powerful movements based on LGBTIQ and racial equity. True Colors Day serves as a gateway for people to get involved in new and innovative ways. So we have some highlights of some pretty high profile, pretty high numbered folks who have supported us so far today. Thank you so much to the huge support, including tweets from The Temptations, Sada Ramirez, Rufus Wainwright, and even Christy Hindi from The Pretenders. So to kick us off, again, we partnered with the UN on this really cool video. We need to build a united worldwide movement, one built on new ideas and youth expertise. So we've partnered with the United Nations Human Rights Office to create the first ever global campaign on LGBTIQ plus youth homelessness. Take a look at the video.
Think of a person, someone who is young, filled with hopes and dreams. At that stage, when support is more important than ever, having access to a safe place to live, education, employment, healthcare, and social connection is fundamental. Can you imagine being deprived of these because of who you are? Young LGBTIQ plus people are often left without a home, without community or government protection while facing constant discrimination and violence. Now think of that same young person again. This time, they are not only dreaming, but they are thriving. The difference is they have access to all these fundamental rights. We must work with young LGBTIQ plus people. Together, we can create inclusive, affordable housing where they can have the opportunity to be their best selves. Together, we can build a world where every young person has a safe place to call home, no matter who they are or who they love.
So grateful for that partnership with the UN, which brings us to our day and our time together today. We're going to have two discussions today. Our first of those two discussions is going to be about LGBTIQ homelessness across the world and immigration. And our second is going to be about the power of storytelling. And then we have a really special world premiere of a video, Tainted Love. So to kick us off, it's my pleasure, my honor, to introduce two very special colleagues of mine. The first of which is Jha'asryel-Bishop, an executive member of the National Youth Leadership Forum on Homelessness. And the second of which is Hannah Hussey, lawyer at NYLAG and NYC, focusing on LGBT communities and working with people at the intersections of immigration and homelessness. Welcome, Bishop. Welcome, Hannah. Hello, hello.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here today.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Thank you for joining us today. It's been a while since I've seen your faces, JK. Cool, let's jump right in. First of all, how's your True Colors Day? How's your day, period?
Well, so there's been quite quiet. I just came out of a theater group workshop here in New York City with Theater of the Oppressed. So it's been a pretty chill day.
Cool. What about you, Hannah?
And I'm so glad to see all of the social media and Instagram and Twitter lighting up with True Colors announcements. I think that's a really happy thing to see in my feed this morning.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I appreciate you both for joining, and I want to keep us on time. So let's jump right in. My first question, let's start with you, Bishop. And I have a question about what homelessness looks like where you're from. Tell us where you're from. Tell us what homelessness looks like where you're from and how the issue is discussed, if it's even discussed at all.
Yeah. So hi, everyone. My name is Jha'asryel-Akquil Bishop. I go by Bishop in these spaces. And use they them pronouns. I'm originally from Georgetown, Guyana, or the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. It's the only English-speaking country in South America. And I've had the honor of being the youth ambassador for several years, representing the Ministry of Culture, Youth and Sport. While I lived in Guyana, the conversation of homelessness was not apparent. Honestly, I think the way people have discussed homelessness, even to this day in Guyana, is one that is visual. You have to see it. And you have to be looking a certain way to be considered homeless. My understanding of homelessness shifted when I became involved in the US system of homelessness and working with HUD and being the youth coordinator and being in New York City's continuum of care and, being part of those conversations that we've had around what a multiple definition of homelessness should look like, or what a single definition should look like, and understanding that while I was running away from home and sleeping at my aunt for days at a time, that was considered under the US's definition for youth and young adults experiencing homelessness, right? That like me being at a friend's house for multiple days without my parents knowing was an experience of homelessness that I didn't understand was or identified with, because that language and that definition wasn't used in my culture. And I think what that, as I've been thinking about this question for this day, has really led me to understand is that homelessness is what it is because of capitalism. And if you break it down, right, you break it down to, in different countries, people have different practices and ways of living. But when you create a standard of living, when you tell everyone they have to have a house that looks a certain way, that has a white picket fence, and drive this or move around in these kinds of necessities, then you create a world that was not built for them, then puts them again in a place of oppression and not having enough, when if it is the culture that I can stay by my aunt and it doesn't affect anyone and it's okay, right? That isn't an experience of homelessness. But when you bring a standard definition in, it becomes one, and it becomes one you have to resource, and it becomes one that has limited resources. So I think, to further expound, in Guyana, it is not a conversation that's being had. And I think the limitations around that is just acknowledging homelessness as multiple things, not just a vagrant or somebody on cardboard sleeping on the street.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Bishop. You said two things that for some folks watching, you've done work with DUS and the COC. Can you say a bit about what those things are? And then Hannah, I'll go to you to answer the same question.
Yeah. So I've been working with New York City Continuum of Care for the last 3 years, part as the co-coordinator of New York City Youth Action Board. And the work that I do there is basically to bring the youth voice and the youth perspective to decisions being made in New York City around youth homelessness, informing work that DYCD does, and that's the Department of Youth and Community Development here in New York City. And the national work that I do has stemmed across organizations like Chapin Hall, True Colors United, and the National Youth Forum on Homelessness, some other organizations that I recently stepped away from, Away Home America, and a few more. It's a lot. Pointers to, and the list goes on. But I work in those organizations in the capacity of someone with lived experience of homelessness here in New York City, who rapidly navigated the system, and from the lens of an asylum seeker who navigates those systems very differently than someone who has citizenship, or even someone underneath me, undocumented, might.
Thank you for that, Bishop. Hannah, could you say a bit about that same question, to be honest? Where you from originally, and how is the issue discussed where you're from? But also you obviously have your expertise at NY-LAG. So if you could talk about it through both those lenses, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in the United States. I'm originally from Maine, but now work in New York City at the New York Legal Assistance Group with LGBTQ people looking for legal services. And I would echo so much of what Bishop said. I think here in the United States, we really see that homelessness reflects the other issues in our society. So in a society with rampant racism, we see that young people experiencing homelessness are disproportionately Black and brown. Due to homophobia and transphobia, we see very high numbers of LGBTQI young people experiencing homelessness. Given an incredibly dysfunctional foster care system, we see very high rates of former foster youth struggling with housing. And I think all of these things need to be part of the conversation, but not, very often are not. The other thing I would say, again, echoing Bishop, I think, is that in the United States too, so much of the conversation around homelessness really has to do with street homelessness and young people who may be attending high school, maybe attending college, may at some points be working a job, maybe couch surfing, maybe staying with relatives, maybe staying with friends, maybe engaging in survival sex. Just so often, I think, are not part of the conversation. And I think that has a couple of results, one of which is that young people are left out of solutions. Solutions aren't necessarily always targeted to young people. Another thing is that I think youth advocates are not always at the table and are not part of kind of brainstorming what solutions could and should look like. And to me, that's such a loss.
Thank you so much for that. I'm going to move on to my next question for you both, which is like, other than housing, what economic issues do LGBTIQ youth face based on their identities? Are they culturally specific topics that you want to bring into the conversation? Because as we know, this is a nuanced conversation and none of us live monolithic lives. So Bishop, if you want to take that one first.
Yeah, I could definitely start from like just going back on the plane to Guyana. Part of being LGBTQ in Guyana is that it doesn't exist, and it can't exist in a space where you are free to express yourself. And so me seeking asylum in America is part of that, right? So homelessness is part of that experience. Running away from home is part of the experience. Because there isn't resources there to support young people who are LGBTQ that may be rejected from their family households or may be rejected from communities. A lot of what they experience. There is about one national known organization in Guyana, is called SASAD. And I think, I don't even remember the acronym out of my head, which is, I think, Society Against Discrimination or something. So, and then there's one local organization that's not, I don't know the name because it's not talked about a lot, that deals with, you know, folks who are TGNC specifically in that larger spectrum. And then fast forwarding here, I think a lot of the like homelessness issues that we experience, one, as said earlier, it stems from deeper things within our systems that we need to address. And I think that starts with like poverty and where that comes from and how that's created. In America with redlining, in Guyana with political divide based on ethnicity that's created after, you know, emancipation after independence. And all of these things stem back to a particular character, right? And I can't help but to like step away from like speaking politically or to say, it looks like we all are kind of just going way back to the roots. And at the root, we have oppressors, and we have oppressors that look a certain way, you know, that have done certain things in different systems in different countries that continue to create these things that we now have challenges with housing, right? We've again told people they need to live life a certain way and have created laws and regulations that says if a person isn't living in this particular area, then they can't live there. In Guyana, we have what's called squatting areas, where people who may not be able to afford the houses and the whatnot can build up their own little tents, and they can legally live there and chill. In America, I know that experience is very brutal for many, because they will experience police brutality. They will be removed with force from spaces, unless it's so extreme like California, like Oakland, where it's just become the norm, right? I think another thing too is like, you don't really see LGBTQ young people in the streets because you can't be out in the streets. If your home's not safe, the street's worse. And so what we find ourselves involved in, and I think a lot of is the trafficking industry, right? Where people are given opportunities to go to other Caribbean islands and or foreign countries to live these safe lives. And a lot of my peers, you know, have fallen into human trafficking, have had terrible experiences, and are now navigating their own asylum in other places in the world. It looks like being or living in Guyana and being trapped, locked away from your parents, and having very, very abusive experiences with people who know those circumstances and are taking advantage of it because they know you won't go say, Mom, this is what's happening with me, or this is what this person's doing with me. It looks very different here, I think, but some of those similar experiences I've also heard in drop-in centers that I've been a part of right here in the United States, right, where people are traveling from one state to the other in this promise of having a relationship that would offer them that stability or that support, and end up in far worse situations, and losing documents, losing their ability to really navigate systems and services with with a calm mind. I mean, there's so much that I can say to it, right? But there's no real difference. It's just that in one world, in this world, America that I live in, there's more resources to support my individual growth and my journey versus living in Guyana, where it's one, you have the cultural discrimination and sort of ostracism that happens, but also the lack of resources to combat that.
Thank you for that. And actually, you quite beautifully answered my next question, which was more about the specific challenges of people in your country. Han, can you talk a bit about the process of seeking asylum and gaining citizenship in the U.S. through the legal lens? And then, Bishop, I'll come back to you from your own and have answered the same question from your own personal experience.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think the process of seeking asylum in the United States is an incredibly grueling one. It's also an incredibly long and complicated one. In most instances, somebody has to, with some exceptions, file within 1 year for asylum, within 1 year of arriving to the United States, which I think, especially for young people who may be navigating that process on their own, it's just not a lot of time to figure out how to do that. It's very challenging to succeed in the asylum process without a lawyer. It also asks young people to relive a lot of trauma that they may have experienced in their country of origin. And there's not necessarily a lot of supports provided. So, at certain points in the process of seeking asylum, young people may be unable to work with documentation, unable to access kind of critical supports, including things like food stamps. And so I think it does put young people in particular in a very difficult position, especially if they don't have family support or kind of other support systems in the United States, either because they have family rejection or because they just kind of don't have family here, or because their support systems are also really struggling with issues around immigration and poverty. And so I think it's very challenging to navigate in that way. The other thing I would say is that there's several kind of avenues that young people may use in addition to asylum in seeking immigration relief. And again, I think all of those often involve making really weighty, stressful decisions, weighing costs and benefits. And for young people who are navigating that, whether or not they have a lawyer, without kind of a lot of emotional support and people that they trust around them, it can be a really isolating and difficult experience.
Thanks for that, Con. Bishop, did you want to answer the question from your own experience? That'd be great.
Yeah, I can add to that. And I definitely agree with you, Hannah. It is a very long, long process. In the time that I've been here, it's almost going to be 5 years since I've moved to the United States in search of a new home. And it's been a very traumatic time, I think, thinking about my own personal interests and wanting to travel the world and wanting to go places and see cultures and bring that to a place where, I can create solutions, and being limited by that, because while you can, apply for travel passes, your lawyers themselves will say don't, because there is no guarantee that you'd be allowed. And so there's a lot of mistrust in the system that I think is built to support you. In itself, it's being a part of communities where I have other peers like myself who to this day have not filed for an asylum because they are so fearful that if they present themselves, they'll be sent back to experience the trauma and pain that we ran from. And so even, just being a leader in this space and navigating all of this and navigating conversations around homelessness, around supports that oftentimes shy away from immigration because of the national tension that there is, it's breaking because I'm the like I want to help everyone person, but knowing that my own struggle is one that is not addressed in the spaces that I have allowed voices in its full capacity.
Thank you for that so much. I'll ask you both to answer this last question, which is you can answer this for the movement and also for yourselves individually. But what is the future of this work? These intersections between queer and trans identities, homelessness, and immigration. Like, what does that look like? What's next?
Do you want to go first? I mean, there's so much that I have. Go on.
Yeah, I'll take the first stab. It's a huge question. I mean, I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is the future of this work needs to be youth-led, and I think about that kind of on a systems level, and also kind of as a reminder to myself individually. I think thinking about ways to be collaborative, creative, to get out of the box. I think there's a lot of initiatives that are doing that already and that provide good models, but I'd like to see that kind of be the norm everywhere. I think when I think about this work, I think about ways to dismantle stigma. So dismantle stigma around kind of homelessness itself, and also kind of some of the conversations that I think happen often in parallel. So thinking about stigma and kind of the criminalization of sex work, thinking about stigma and criminalization around substance use. And I think about kind of ways to make sure that the conversations and the work that happens around youth homelessness is happening in conversation and collaboration with movements for racial justice, for LGBTQI equity, efforts to kind of, again, decriminalize kind of many of the systems of control over young people and families that exist. I think about ways that we could reinvest resources into the kinds of systems and supports that young people say they want, and away from places that I think often bill themselves as helpful to keeping young people, families, and communities safe, like foster care or juvenile justice, but in fact that often do the opposite. And I certainly think, for myself, of ways to address the barriers that I think are so common for young people experiencing homelessness, but that aren't always part of the conversation. So, one thing I often think about is access to identity documents, which is a huge issue for young people who have transitioned and don't have documents in their own name, for young people who have perhaps moved around a lot and simply just have lost documents or had them taken from them along the way, for people who are here with different forms of immigration status and perhaps are unable to obtain kind of just proof of identity. I think there's so much that lawyers can do kind of on an individual level as well as advocates on a more systems level. And I think those are kind of issues that deserve our collective attention.
Yeah, I feel like you said that also beautifully. And I'll add a more personal experience to that and say, I think the future of this work for me is not doing it at all, right? This work is a plaster over a very bold and explicit solution, and that is to do away with systems that create classes, that create groupings of people that may benefit from some solutions more than other, right? And really address these things at its root cause. We have constitutions and world governments that have laws and regulations that are enabling, right, all of the oppressive practices that are ongoing. And charity is the spoon feed to say, listen, we're not doing so bad. Here is a moment in time where we're doing something good. Just calm down, right? It's like several Black men being shot in their back, then one cop getting put in prison, and we all feel like it's something great that's happened. Every other person should have been put in prison. Every other person should have been taken to trial the same way. And so while there is a world where some people can experience luxury, all people should, because luxury is being paid for by the debt and labor of somebody else. And so in which world can you imagine not feeling guilty or obligated to give what you've taken forcefully back to the people? For me, It's looking at all the treasuries in the world and saying, we know what we've done. We know that we've caused harm. We know that we've enslaved people. We know that we're oppressing people every single day. And this has to come to an end. We have to return what we've taken to the people, and we have to accept that we all are equal, we all are humans, and we all are entitled to this land. There shouldn't be borders. There shouldn't be passports to get from one place to the other. We are creating the very struggles that people are experiencing because we are limiting how much access they have to Earth. Right? We are telling them that they have to pay this much for air because they live in this specific geographical location. It doesn't make sense to me. And it's a narrative that I think people who are watching this in power need to say, listen, this is a bunch of papers that some niggers, some peoples that was drinking alcohol just decide to write up and say, this is how everyone should live. And we don't have to live like that. And when I say nigger and when I said it, I don't mean black people. I mean people that are evil, right? That have given that name to my people, really, right? People like to project. And so there's a lot of evil doing in the world. And the future of this work is to put it away, to move away from this idea that we have to be fixing things, right? I want a world where people that look like me, young people that have different identities and expressions, have spaces where they can be and do just that and experience life and imagine things and manifest things that they imagine, all in the freedom to do so without somebody telling them that you can't wear a dress because traditionally that's not how it's done. You know, traditionals are created to make people in a moment in time feel good about their existence and their belief. But the future of this work is really not to do it and to have a space in a world where we all can just be ourselves and we all can just benefit from the earth without taxes and all these crazy things that are man-made and made up.
Wow. I am grateful for you. I'm grateful that I don't have to go after that with any sort of response. Thank you, Bishop, Hannah. It has been phenomenal time shared with you and spent with you. Thank you for making the time to have this conversation about LGBTQ identities, homelessness, asylum, immigration. Truly grateful. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Great. For those who are just now getting caught up with us, it is True Colors Day. The last Wednesday of every April every year is True Colors Day, our International Day of Advocacy around preventing and ending LGBTIQ youth homelessness. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and questioning young people are 120% more likely to experience homelessness than non-LGBTIQ youth. We would love for you to take that True Colors Day pledge. What does that mean? Here's what we believe. Housing is a human right. Everyone deserves a safe place to call home, regardless of their class, their race, their ethnicity, their gender, or their sexual orientation. LGBTIQ youth should never have to fear discrimination or violence in seeking housing or services. And to end homelessness, we must end systemic racism in housing, healthcare, and policing, which all contribute to higher rates of homelessness for Black, Brown, and Indigenous youth. Immigrants and asylum seekers, many of whom are LGBTIQ and fleeing persecution, deserve a safe home. And relief and resources for youth experiencing homelessness must be included in COVID-19 responses. We're not through this thing yet. Young people are the present and the future leaders of the youth homelessness movement, and nonprofit organizations have the duty of supporting and facilitating youth activism. And so if you agree with us, if you agree to this pledge, please go to www.truecolorsunited.org/day or truecolorsday.org and take the pledge. If you're a member of an organization, go to the same website and partner up with us. If you're a person who's watching and wants to get involved and raise awareness for the day, download our unselfie signs, take a unselfie about how you also believe that housing is a human right and use the hashtag True Colors Day. And now it's my pleasure of bringing on our next two guests and starting our next panel. We know that storytelling, whether that's through traditional news outlets, whether that's through scripted narrative in TV and film, whether that's through documentary, is essential in changing the narrative around any issue. And so our next panel is really about the power of storytelling. Again, it's my honor to bring up two colleagues and friends. First of those is Jawanza James Williams, the Director of Organizing for Vocal New York. The second of which is Jakari Earl, a multi-hyphenate creative from the South Side of Chicago. Welcome. Welcome, Jawanza. Welcome, Jakari. Happy True Colors Day.
Hi, happy True Colors Day. You see, I busted out with my blue today. This is my true colors. My true colors.
Period. Well, look, me and Jawanza are in our show black, so I got
black background. So
yeah. We're gonna jump right in, and I guess the theme of this conversation is around storytelling. So I'll start by asking, when people think about youth homelessness in your community, I know Jawanza, you're from Texas, but you live in New York, and Jakari, you're in Chicago. What do they think of when they think about youth homelessness?
Well, I can go ahead and go. I think as far as youth homelessness, when it comes to my community, I grew up in the South Side, and when I say the South Side, I mean a very underserviced community. I grew up in Roseland, in the hundreds. So it wasn't really a conversation. Youth homelessness wasn't really a term. So, it was almost normal for people to, well into their 20s and 30s, still stay with family and friends and, be on public assistance. That was the norm in my community. So it wasn't necessarily like people talked about youth homelessness as a issue. It was just something that you kind of seen, like, oh, well, they ain't got their stuff together. Oh, he ain't got no job. Like, they just kind of, shady about it. You know how the community is. So, yeah, I think that in my community, it's not really, there's no spotlight on it. And I had to kind of go to other places to, find those resources.
Thanks for that, Jakari. Jawanza, go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, so the thing that I would say, I think one of the issues that we have with homelessness, with any kind of, structural issue that people are experiencing, is oftentimes that, and I think about this as a person that experienced homelessness and a person that organizes to end homelessness, not just youth homelessness, but as a sort of origin to the crisis, is that oftentimes people only understand because of the sort of chaos of what it means to experience homelessness, what it means to be housing insecure, what it means to be living in abject poverty, which has, we often think about it in a very limited scope. Like, I'm thinking about myself, my people around me, and perhaps my block or my community, loosely. So people think in this hyper interpersonal way, whenever, not acknowledging the structural realities that lead to a crisis of homelessness, which adds to a sort of culture that I think Jakari was sort of referencing, where people are like, well, there must be something wrong with these individuals because there's no sort of like structural analysis and making a connection between homelessness and all of the other crises that we're all responding to and experiencing. So I say that to say that I think most people are thinking about homelessness, in particular LGBTQ youth homelessness, as a phenomena connected specifically to Black, brown, poor people's homophobia, which I think is a misunderstanding. I think that we have to think about homophobia. That is a reality. That is I'm not discounting the reality that homophobia, transphobia, other kinds of problematic ideologies lead to, children or young people being kicked out of their homes or having to leave their homes, prematurely. That's a reality, and at the same time, there are other factors that are at play. So I think we have to think multi-dimensional. We have to think in many layers about what is actually happening and what is the scope of the issue. Because at the end of the day, folks can't begin to have a conversation about homelessness if we don't implicate the state's responsibility in providing people the access and the ability to maintain housing. Because if people aren't employed, what are the real reasons that they aren't employed? And I think we got to get away from the sort of hyper-personal sort of analysis and think much more broadly, because again, we're experiencing a homelessness crisis that rivals that of the Great Depression.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. That really is a beautiful segue into my next question, and some of what you got at. But I'm wondering, the news and the media, and even, let's say, in entertainment, the portrayal of homelessness tends to be very stereotypical. And so I guess my question for you both, through your own perspective, is what's missing from the narrative about youth homelessness?
I'll definitely say, as far as the narrative is concerned, it's a lot that's missing from the, I guess, the population that experiences homelessness the most in general, not just because they're experiencing homelessness, but because those are vulnerable populations, usually of color, usually melanated, you know what I'm saying, usually underserviced. And this goes all the way back in the day when they had started gentrifying certain areas and moved all the, people with nicer incomes and whatever you want to say to the suburbs, and now they gentrifying and switching it back. So it goes back to that. Also, the fact that in our schools in inner city communities don't have consumer economics, which teaches us about credit, taxes, W-2s, W-9s, anything you need, whether you working for somebody else, running your own business, or working in a corporate job. They don't teach us those things. So coming into real life, coming into the workforce, we don't have these tools. So you get these entry-level jobs, you don't pay your taxes, end up with tax evasion, go to jail, or you end up getting your money from the streets, which, comes with a whole lot of different, terms back with it as well. So I think that when it comes to the narrative, because that wasn't the first question I was reading, but when it comes to the narrative around everything and around youth homelessness and things like that, I think we have to think about, like you said, multidimensional. So spiritually, a lot of people do not come into being parents with the spiritual luggage that they need, or spiritual know-how that they need to raise a child. With that being said, it's a lot that goes into that. So you have to, understand that every 7 years, a child goes through a different transition in their life. So people don't know that. So they're missing the points where they speak to them about, their bodies and about sex and about their feelings and things like that. And then things happen where they are taken advantage of, and they end up in these situations where now they are, experiencing all this stuff, and youth homelessness is just one of them. So I think when it comes to the multidimensional thing, just thinking about it from a holistic standpoint and not so much of just what that person is experiencing at that moment, because as we know, everything is connected. So,
Thank you for that, Jawanza.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate all of that, Jakari. One of the things that I think that I've been working on to really inform and sort of shift and augment the narratives about homelessness, about the crisis that we're experiencing, especially as it relates to LGBTQIA plus young people experiencing homelessness on the streets or in shelters, or doubled up, tripled up, or whatever, or having to live in situations where they aren't able to negotiate what their sex looks like, if they use drugs, what drugs they use, how much they use, who they have sex with. This loss of agency and power. The thing that I want to make the connection is that the same kinds of structural and socio-political and cultural violence against Black people, queer people, are people that are, by degree, the furthest away from the sort of white, cis, heterosexual, male, moneyed, property-owning people. We catch hell. And a very critical piece that's missing from the narrative is that homelessness is as racist as police violence. Homelessness is an ultimate consequence of capitalism and its need for a white supremacist structure, and that there's real problems that come from this sort of organized chaos, this organized and manufactured scarcity. So I want to make sure that people walk away from this conversation understanding that, like, the same parts that led to Trayvon Martin being stalked, shot, killed, the same parts that led to George Floyd being choked to death, the same parts that led to Sandra Bland's murder, the same stuff is the same stuff that leads to hundreds of thousands of us experiencing homelessness at some point in our lives. And the only way that we're going to respond to that, the only way that's going to be meaningful if we respond to that, is if we understand how anti-Black racism, how xenophobia, how transphobia, how homophobia are driving the fact that the state, and by the state I mean city governments, local governments, state governments, federal governments, and even international structures are not responding to the realities that these are disproportionately impacting people based on their race, where they come from, what language they speak, how their bodies are, how they identify, how they are perceived, regardless of how they identify. So I think that it's going to be really critical for us to always understand, if we are to affirm that Black lives matter, we must absolutely end homelessness. And if you're not thinking about those connections, again, if you're not thinking multidimensional or intersectionally, as we learned from Black feminists like Kimberly Crenshaw, then we're never going to be able to actually solve the problem because we don't understand the problem.
Wow, thank you for that. Yeah, homelessness is as racist as police brutality. Those are some words. Thank you, Jawanza. I think where my mind goes to that question with what's missing from the narrative is that the narrative isn't even constructed by the people with lived expertise and experience, right? And so one of my next sort of talking point and question is around the importance. Like, why is it important that people with lived experience, especially young people in particular, are able to define their own narrative?
Well, I think personally, when it comes to lived experience, I've kind of made in a way, I guess, a personal name for myself as far as like being a lived experience consulting and kind of like branding myself that way in the past. So experiencing homelessness and, you know, receiving services from certain organizations, I found a way to like network and, you know, because I wanted to do the work. I wanted to do the same thing that they were doing. I wanted to work closely to the community that I was serving. At the time, I was doing like canvassing for like Amnesty and HRC and stuff, like refugee rights. So, you know, I resonate with the last speaker who was speaking about their experience with immigration rights and whatnot. So coming into receiving services from homelessness organizations, because like I said, in my community, they don't really have them. And if they do, it's not talked about because that's not a thing that's not even the biggest issue that we're going through in the community. You know what I'm saying? So they don't really talk about it as an issue. So coming into getting services from organizations, I found a way to network and, you know, find my way into positions so that I could do the same type of work. So I was able to, you know, work in homelessness prevention, serving up to 100 participants a day and, you know, get tested and counseling certifications and stuff. And I was able to see behind the, you know, I guess behind the fourth wall or whatever of what's going on with service providers. And I think looking at that, it helped me get a holistic viewpoint of everything. And why I'm sorry, y'all. I be needing the questions right there because I start going. I be needing to remind myself. But yes, it definitely gives me the holistic viewpoint of how, you know, the systematic, how overworked and overstimulated the barriers are in that system of nonprofit. So I think that, you know, bringing it all the way around, bringing it all the way around, I think it's most important to have the experiences from the people in the community, definitely, because you don't really know you really don't know how to serve the community unless you come from that experience. There's a lot of people that run nonprofits that, you know, are of a different skin color, maybe from a different experience. And, you know, they have degrees and they went to school and that's all great. But when it comes to actually serving a population from a vulnerable community, a population that honestly needs shamans and spiritual intervention, and to try to come there with, you know, things that you've learned in a institution is helpful, but it's not necessarily helpful. It's helpful because you want to help, but it's not doing the actual work that's required. And I think getting people with lived experience that know exactly what's going on is what's going to help these organizations actually do the work that they're trying to do. Also, I want to speak about people who are in different positions, different privileges, and using that privilege to advocate within policy within your organization. So if you're at a specific privilege in your organization, let's say you're a CEO, you're not of the color, not of the community you serve, but you love the people you fight for. Okay, you need to work on bringing the next person up that knows that community that you see doing the work. They may not have all of the qualifications and the bachelor degrees that you do, but they have the experience. So work on using your privilege to advocate within your organization to bring up the next person that can make a change throughout the organization and, you know, fulfill the mission statements that people just jot anything down in. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Jakari. Jawanza, I know you know, obviously your work at Vocal around organizing and even outside of Vocal around organizing. I wonder if you can answer that same question, but from your other hat around like writing and media representation and why folks with lived expertise should be involved in defining the narrative in that way.
Yeah, there's so much to talk about here. And I really think that Jakari really got as expansive as we need to get when we're having this conversation about who gets to tell stories about who and why. The first thing that I would say is that we're also asking a question about the distinctions and about the utility of advocacy versus organizing. Advocacy being, we're speaking on behalf of, and that's where you typically have your people with direct experience consulting with, advocacy organizations, and there's a power dynamic there. But at the end of the day, the sole purpose is for the institution to speak on behalf of young people experiencing homelessness. But in an organizing project, the primary premise being folks speaking for themselves is a distinction that is very, very important when we're thinking about organizing and thinking about storytelling. And the thing that I tell people directly impacted by the issues that I work on, including youth homelessness, is that the only time you should be telling your story about the horrors of homelessness, and it's very difficult to listen. I mean, folks know, but like hearing the stories of people experiencing homelessness can be incredibly triggering, incredibly traumatizing, and re-traumatizing for them. So I think that a trauma-informed approach to organizing, to storytelling, when it relates to LGBT youth homelessness, is it's important that the young person or any person that's telling their traumatized or stories is that you're not bleeding for the public for the sole purpose of, generating sympathy or, some sense of like sadness. It's important that people hear our stories because that's how they understand us as human beings. That's how we communicate. It's how we develop relationships and a sense of each other. But I do think that in the context of responding again to a structural, cultural, socio-political, economic issue that has almost nothing to do with the individual and their behaviors, it's important that you establish your experience to establish your authority. So you operate from experiential authority. So I'm only sharing my story so you understand why I know what I'm talking about. I'm only telling you about my experience inside of a shelter because I need you to understand that I'm an authority in this situation, and it creates a new kind of power dynamic. And it's very important that young people, in particular marginalized, hyper-marginalized folks like Black trans women who use drugs, engage in sex work, who are experiencing homelessness, it's important that they speak from and experience, you can only make your demand from a place of power. And it's important that you understand how your story relates to that. And if we are not telling our own stories, if the folks are not telling their own stories, then you are subject to mistakes that can have, minor consequences or devastating consequences. And I think that's what needs to be understood as a whole, because there's a continuum at play. Because again, I think it's important for individuals to meet their immediate needs, and do advocacy work, do organizing work to make that a reality. But our ultimate collective goal should always be, how do we eliminate and eradicate homelessness and relegate it to a forgotten, or not forgotten, but a barbaric past? Because it is the stuff of barbarism. When you have a state, the United States, the richest country on the planet, and not just now, but the richest country in the history of human civilization. And there's 500,000 plus people experiencing homelessness across the state of, across the United States. And of course, we all know here, especially those of us that are providers or those of us that work in city or federal government, that we don't even know the actual number of people experiencing homelessness. And it's deeply disturbing because even from an empirical perspective, we can't even begin to craft the solution to the problems if we don't even understand the scope of the problems. And you definitely won't understand it if you don't have the stories of the experience coming from people from a place of power who are directly impacted.
Thank you. Yeah, our ultimate collective goal should be, how do we eradicate homelessness? Wow, Jakari and Jawanza, thank you. Yeah, I love you both tremendously, and I appreciate you making time for the conversation today. So thank you.
Thank you, Twiggy.
All right, folks. Wow, what a day. We are coming close to an end. But before that, we have a special performance, if you will. The Sharp House mixtape capsule features 3 emerging artists who identify as women, people of color, and/or LGBTQ+, covering iconic tracks from the 1980s, a period of imagination and inspiration. Here on the True Colors Day stream, we're proud to premiere King Jaila's version of Tainted Love. Jaila Sims made history as the first transgender person to win a reality show on MTV's Making the Band in 2009, earning her first GLAAD Award nomination. Since then, she has toured with acts such as Diddy, penned hits for mega pop artists, including Robin Thicke, and even worked closely with her mentor, R&B diva Faith Evans. In 2011, Jaila became a Grammy-nominated songwriter. Based in LA, she is finishing her debut album set for a spring 2021 release and in pre-production for a docuseries chronicling her journey being trans in the entertainment industry. Without further ado, King Jaila, Tainted Love. Wow. That was amazing. Thank you, thank you, thank you to King, Jaila, and Sharp House. Check out the Sharp House live stream at 4 p.m. Eastern today for the full mixtape capsule premiere. You'll see me there too. Go to truecolorsday.org to learn more. Wow, folks, it has been an hour. It has been an amazing time with you all. In closing, I just want to remind folks to go to truecolorsday.org and take the pledge to join us as organizational partners and as individuals. Point blank period. Housing is a human right, and it's our due diligence to do everything we can to raise awareness to the issue. But as many of our speakers on today's panel have said, to eradicate the issue of youth homelessness. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our team. Thank you to our interpreters. And thank you all for attending today's second True Colors Day live stream. Follow me too, at Simply Twiggy on all platforms, and continue supporting True Colors. Thank you all.